Hello. Our outside reading group consisted of Matt, Rahil, Lucas, and Lily, and we read novels by Ernest Hemingway.
Ernest Hemingway was a critically acclaimed novelist, well known for his style of writing and books that often deal with the themes of nature, love, and war. Hemingway was born to a middle-class family in the suburb of Oak Park, Illinois, in the year 1899. During his time in high school, Hemingway excelled in English, while also writing several articles that were published in local newspapers. After high school, Hemingway wrote for the Kansas City Star as a journalist. This is where many believe that Hemingway developed his direct style of writing. As a young man, Ernest Hemingway served in World War I, driving an ambulance in Italy and being wounded by mortar fire. Hemingway's time serving in World War I heavily influenced both his life and writing. Later in life, Hemingway grew fond of nature and big game fishing, which also appeared in his novels.
When analyzing Hemingway's merits, it is extremely important to take into account the political and social setting in which his writing took place. Hemingway was a part of what he himself dubbed the Lost Generation. This is made up of American young adults after World War I who felt detached from American society while also feeling like they led lives without purpose or substance. Characters that fit this mold appeared in several of his novels, most famously in The Sun Also Rises, which is known for Hemingway's characterization of the Lost Generation. Hemingway's hardships that he experienced in his life were also evident in his novels. From war to financial crisis, Hemingway drew from these experiences as inspiration for his many stories. As an ambulance driver stationed in Italy during World War I, Hemingway saw the horrors of war firsthand. Many of his books included For Whom the Bell Tolls, The Sun Also Rises, and A Farewell to Arms, all deal with the horrors and consequences of war. Hemingway also drew from other life experiences that weren't as extreme as war. These conflicts included the hardship of marriage, the conflict of love, and the search for material wealth. After World War I came the rise of consumerism and modernism, causing Americans to become more materialistic than ever. Because of this, Hemingway writes in a style that exhibits his futility and cynicism, which illustrates his loss of faith in modern society. Ernest Hemingway wrote several renowned novels, including To Have and Have Not, The Sun Also Rises, A Farewell to Arms, and For Whom the Bell Tolls.
To Have and Have Not is a novel about a small-time boat captain named Harry Morgan that takes illegal action smuggling Chinese citizens into the U.S. to keep him and his family financially afloat. During the book, Morgan becomes entangled with the upper-class yachtsmen of the society in the U.S. The book explores the theme of the hardship of marriage and relationships, as well as the fight to be successful in this materialistic U.S. world. Morgan is just a normal guy and is faced with a somewhat ordinary situation for the time.
Another one of Hemingway's famous works is For Whom the Bell Tolls. It's told through the perspective of an American soldier serving the Spanish Civil War, Robert Jordan. Robert gets into a power struggle with the leader of the guerrilla band in terms of whether they should blow up the bridge or not. Major themes of this book include the loss of innocence and humanity due to war, as well as love. And this book epitomizes Hemingway's writing style through clipped and concise syntax, which creates a cynical mood that reflects his attitude towards the Republican war effort after his experiences with them, as well as Hemingway's attitudes towards war in general. Lastly, we have Farewell to Arms, another one of Hemingway's most popular works. It's about a young American ambulance driver who is deployed to Europe during World War I. The man, whose name is Frederick Henry, resembled Hemingway himself, as he too had served in Italy during the war through driving an ambulance. The book deals with themes of the horrors of war, the joy of love, as well as the pain of heartbreak.
The Sun Also Rises is a novel that follows the characters of Jake Barnes and Lady Brett Ashley, as they and a group of friends travel from the 1920s parties in France to the Spanish bullfighting countryside. In the story, Jake Barnes, a World War I veteran, and his fellow friends symbolize the lost generation, with their constant feelings of their life being void of substance and aimlessness. The story also involves Jake and Brett being in love. However, Brett finds their love unattainable due to a tragic injury that Jake received in the war, rather choosing a string of other men to be in relationships with.
The Nobel Prize was created in order to honor extraordinary work in a particular field. In 1954, Ernest Hemingway earned the prestigious award for, as the Nobel Committee defines, his mastery of the art of narrative, most recently demonstrated in The Old Man and the Sea, and for the influence that he has exerted on contemporary style. The winner of the Nobel Prize in literature must have bestowed the greatest benefit on mankind in an ideal direction. Through Hemingway's writing, it is clear that he met and exceeded this requirement of excellence due to his revolutionary writing style that was so easily relatable to readers.
Hemingway was deserving of this award because he had profound impact on the American reading audience that was extremely significant to the entire American landscape. His direct writing style refreshed readers with honesty and simplicity, which allowed readers to easily comprehend the complex social issues of war and love which commonly appeared in his novels.
Hemingway's novels did not shy away from the complex and solemn issues of the time. The main themes were war, love, and heartbreak and economic hardship. This made his novels not only relevant and timely, but also timeless, as these are important issues that we still deal with today. Many of his books talk about the horror of warfare, which was especially important to the audience in the early 20th century during the World Wars. The 19-year-old Hemingway's first violent experience of war is an essential factor in his biography, not that he was daunted by it. On the contrary, he found that it was a priceless asset for a writer to see war at first hand and to be able to depict it truthfully. That is why he can conceive of war as a tragic fate having a decisive effect on the whole of his generation. But he views it with a calm realism void of illusion, which disdains all emotional comment as disciplined objectivity, stronger because it is hard won. Beyond the content of his novels, the very techniques and styles that he chose made his novels much more effective in delivering an emotional message to readers. He often shied away from embellished words, and so did his characters. Hemingway's significance as one of this epic's great molders of style is apparent in both American and European narrative art over the past 25 years, chiefly in the vivid dialogue and the verbal thrust and parry, in which he has set a standard as easy to imitate as it is difficult to attain. With masterly skill, he reproduces all the nuance of the spoken word, as well as those pauses in which the thought stands still and the nervous mechanism is thrown out of gear. Evidence includes, I was always embarrassed by the words sacred, glorious, and sacrifice in the expression in vain, Frederick Henry says in A Farewell to Arms. Abstract words such as glory, honor, courage, or hollow were obscene besides the concrete names of village, the number of roads, the names of rivers, the numbers of regiments, and the dates. Another example is from To Have and Have Not by a character named Harry Morgan. Her early indifference to her husband's caresses, her desire for children and security, her lack of sympathy with her husband's aims, her sad attempts to stimulate interest in the sexual act that had become actually repugnant to her. It would be a fine chapter. When Hemingway would describe a scene, he would often string many dependent clauses together with commas, giving a reader a sensory feel. One of the example includes, the sun also rises. After a while, we came out of the mountains, and there were trees along both sides of the roads, and a stream and ripe fields of green. And the road went on, very white and straight ahead, and then it lifted to a little rise. And off on the left was a hill with an old castle, with buildings close around it, and a field of green going right up to the walls and shifting into the wind. The Sun All Rises, Chapter 10. And For Whom the Bell Tolls, after Anselmo, Robert's best friend, is killed by a flying block of steel, Robert says, did not turn him over to see what the piece of steel had done. Robert's cynicism is that he never bothered to check if his best friend was alive or not. He just knew in times of war, death is a very commonplace and should be expected.
In The Sun Also Rises, we can examine the following quote. I can't stand to think my life is going so fast and I'm not really living it, with Jake responding, nobody ever lives their life all the way up except bullfighters. Historically, the lost generation represents the many young men and women who felt their lives had no purpose or meaning following World War I. This dilemma affecting the younger generation after the war is exemplified by Cone, who feels that he is wasting his life, which he is beginning to see as fleeting. Instead of offering consolation, Jake rather tells Cone quite cynically and directly that except a few phenomenal people, nobody lives their life all the way up, or lives their lives to the fullest. Since Cone will most likely never become a bullfighter, Jake is hinting that Cone must come to accept life with feelings of aimlessness and displeasure. Hemingway also has the characters use simple and direct language, which mimics the real-life conversations between people in everyday life. People can relate to these characters as they themselves know that they aren't phenomenal or special and also admit to their shortcomings, such as feeling life without substance or purpose. In To Have and Have Not, Hemingway creates distinct dialogue between characters that would be like a normal conversation. In one instance, Hemingway has dialogue between Morgan and a boy writing, "I'd enjoy it," the boy said. "If it wasn't for your mate." "He was a good fellow," said Harry. "Did anyone get hurt at the bank? The lawyer? What was his name, Simmons? Get killed? I think so." This direct conversation makes the book seem extremely relatable and not far off, or not only comprehensible by far-off intellectuals. It just represents a conversation, a daily conversation, between people in the real world. In For Whom the Bell Tolls, Hemingway also creates a much more relatable character in Robert Jordan. He had an idealized conception of the Republican cause in the book, but as he became more familiar with it, he began to take on a more pessimistic, cynical attitude towards mostly everything, that, including his surroundings and fellow friends. Much like many intellectuals and other citizens were dissatisfied with the war, and war as a concept as a whole during the time period in which this book was written. We see through the following quote that Hemingway uses short sentences so as to convey the imperfection of humanity, thus making Robert Jordan and Maria more relatable to the readers. He looked at her, and across the meadow where a hawk was hunting, and the big afternoon clouds were coming now over the mountains. And it is not thus for thee with others?" Maria asked him, "they now walking hand in hand?" "No, truly. Thou hast loved many others, some, but not as thee. And it was not thus? Truly, it was a pleasure, but it was not thus." And then the earth moved. "The earth never moved before?" "Nay, truly never." "Aye," she said, and this we have for one day." He said nothing. When discussing their love, Robert and Maria's dialogue comes out as fragmented, demonstrating the imperfections in their thought process and how apprehensive they are with their relationship.
One literary device that Hemingway is known for is repetition. In fact, the best-known sentences that he ever wrote were, "A rose is a rose is a rose, and when you get there, there is no there there." The literary device gave a poetic and artistic feel, leaving the audience with a deeper emotional tie to the book. He also frequently repeated nouns in the same sentence to add sensory details. In Farewell to Arms, he says, "The pine wood crackled and sparked, and then the fire roared in the stove, and the second time Mrs. Guttingen came into the room, she brought big chunks of wood for the fire and a pitcher of hot water. When the room was warm, she brought in breakfast. Sitting up in bed, eating breakfast, we could see the lake and the mountains across the lake on the French side. There was snow on the tops of the mountains, and the lake was a gray steel blue." Another example is from The Sun Also Rises. There were signs on the walls of the churches saying it was forbidden to play pelota against them, and the houses in the village had red tiled roofs, and the road turned off and commenced to climb, and we were going up close along hillside, with a valley below, and hills stretched off back toward the sea. You couldn't see the sea, it was too far away. You could see only hills and more hills, and you knew where the sea was. The repetition of hills automatically causes the reader to focus on that aspect of the scenery that Hemingway was trying to point out. This causes the reader to imagine that area of Spain with hills in every direction. In For Whom the Bell Tolls, Robert Jordan and his lover Maria make love in a forest. Robert describes his overall experience as a dark passage which led to nowhere, then to nowhere, and then again to nowhere. Once again to nowhere, always and forever to nowhere. Through the repetition of nowhere, Hemingway's tendency to repeat phrases in longer sentences exhibited, thus emphasizing the emptiness that Robert Jordan feels despite engaging in a categorically pleasurable activity.
One of the reasons why Hemingway was able to have such a meaningful impact on his American audience was because of how he was able to make his characters extremely relatable and down to earth. Often his protagonists have major flaws. For instance, in A Farewell to Arms, Friedrich Henry confesses constant drinking, prostitutes, lies, and desperate thoughts. Jack Barnes, the main character in The Sun Also Rises, exhibited similar flaws as Friedrich Henry, being extremely cynical and abrasive. Jack Barnes also drank excessively and has a severe injury that inhibited his relationship with women. In the novel To Have and Have Not, Hemingway creates a relatable character in Henry Morgan. For instance, Morgan faces a multitude of problems that average Americans would have faced in their lives, including financial instability and having a poor relationship with his wife and family. Hemingway's deep connection with his audience is further depicted in his Nobel presentation speech, which writes, "He prefers to leave the work of psychological reflection to his readers, and this freedom is of great benefit to him in spontaneous observation." We hope you enjoyed our presentation, and we hope you learned something about why we think Hemingway is deserving of the Nobel Prize. Our citations are right after this.